Um, Natalie, can you keep admitting people?
Yeah, I'm keeping track of it.
Well, welcome everybody to the 2021 Marjorie Mead Hooker Lecture with Jose Castillo and Saidee Springall. Our Dean, Robert Gonzalez, is going to do the introductions in a moment. I'm going to read you the Unm Land Acknowledgement first. Founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia. The original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history.
Thank you, Liz. It gives me a great pleasure and honor to welcome Saidee Springall and Jose Castillo of A911, harking from Mexico City. And I want to just start by talking a little bit about the Marjorie Mead Hooker Visiting Assistant Professorship, of which they are recipients. The prestigious Marjorie Mead Hooker Visiting Professorship was established at the UNM School of Architecture and Planning to honor the memory of architect Marjorie Mead Hooker. A pioneer in the profession of architecture, Marjorie Mead Hooker was the first woman to earn a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Texas, the third woman to earn licensure and practice architecture in Texas, the first woman to be elected as president of the AIA Albuquerque chapter, and the first woman to serve on the New Mexico Board of Examiners of Architects. From 1951 to 65, she was an associate with McHugh, Hooker, Kidder, and Associates. In 1965, she established a private practice. She later joined the Albuquerque architectural firm Flatow, Moore, Bryan, and Fairburn, where she practiced architecture from 1968 to 1988. In 1990, she received the Governor's Award for Outstanding New Mexico Women. In 2003, she received the New Mexico Architects Medal from the American Institute of Architects, New Mexico. So it is with honor and great elation that I welcome Saidee and Jose of the firm A911. A911 is an independent practice of architecture and urbanism founded by Saidee Springall and Jose Castillo, based in Mexico City. Their work includes research, cultural, institutional, housing, mobility projects, urban design, and planning work in various cities in Mexico and Central America. Their award-winning projects include the Spanish Cultural Center, the Elena Garro Cultural Center, the Garcia Terres Library, and Ara Iztacalco Housing Project. They're currently involved in large-scale master plans, including the Tacubaya and San Lázaro transportation hubs, as well as 3 multifamily housing projects designed in partnership with Productora. A911's work constantly negotiates urban complexities with the limitations imposed by political uncertainty, economic cycles, legal ambiguities, and the contingencies of time. The constituent idea of their work is the dual commitment to an architecture that connects the physical and the social, and an architecture that is grounded and informed by the city. The firm earned the bronze medal of the Wholesome Awards for Sustainable Construction in Latin America in 2011, Emerging Voices Award from the Architectural League of New York in 2012, and the Audi Urban Future Award in 2014. In 2015, A911 was recognized as the most visionary architectural firm in Mexico by Obras magazine, and in 2017, Castillo and Springall were selected as a recipient of the Richard Rogers Fellowship, a residency program at the Wimbledon House in London. So please join me in welcoming Saidee and Jose. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, all of you. First of all, we want to thank UNM School of Architecture for this invitation, especially Dean Robert. We are honored to share with you our work and to present to you the way we approach our projects, but most important, the way we build connections between architecture and the world at large. For the last 20 years, we have built a 60-person office dealing with a broad scope of architectural, urban, and mobility projects, diverse in scale and program, with both public and private commissions. Our office's research, build projects, curatorial practices, as well as writings have always been forms of expanding the conversation. If there is a driven idea in our work in this commitment to an architectural that connects the physical with the social, an understanding of architecture as both a material practice and an intellectual and cultural endeavor with public resonance. Our approach to practicing architecture for the past 20 years has occupied a wide range of cultural, academic, and professional spectrums, teaching, curating, writing, designing, and building have been the ways of reimagining the everyday relationship of architecture with the world at large. This commitment to a multi-tiered mode of operating is not an accident, nor a provisional situation. It is a way we find to informing and expanding the range of both ideas and work. It is a way of critically think through the hand, but also creatively constructing with the mind. This is why we think that architecture is a medium that can be understood as a conversation among peers, but also one that constantly reimagines and expands its audience. In this sense, we are very much interested in the design process as a way to connect ideas to build outcomes, to relate the physical with the social, to connect knowledge to the art act of making. Tonight, more than present and describe our projects, we want to use them to talk about issues we care about in a world and in the discipline of architecture. These issues are relevant in the discussions we make every day. They are not abstract preoccupations, but most of deliberate actions. Questions of open city, of equity and inclusion, of the life of buildings beyond architecture, of the unintended consequences of our design choices, of the relationship between visions, plans, urban design, and buildings, of the ways we imagine our work and the way that it is perceived and appropriated. This is why we want to reflect on the city and the territory, on housing, on politics, on food, and on our failures especially, but also on the way we have organized our practice. For us, it's not an accident, but rather a necessity.
In a way, we're talking about 2 decades of practicing and thinking about architecture. And as Saidee said, tonight we're not going to explain the buildings, but actually address them as a way to think about the broader issues, whether it's collaborations, such as we did in the Centro Cultural de España with Javier Sánchez, or in the Centro Cultural de Nagarra with Fernanda Canales, whether it's about intervening in old buildings, such as Librería Jaime García Terrés, or having actually net negative square meters intervened, such as opening up the garage in the Sala Siqueiros to facilitate a new way of relating the city with a cultural facility, or and is in our more commercial work, such as the master plans we're gonna show today. But today, in a way, has to do that architecture for us is this middle point between discipline and a way of knowing the world. And Saidee insisted on this notion of architecture as a form of conversation between the artifice of making and designing with the landscape, the conversation between the practice of architecture as a profession, but also as a cultural endeavor, as a way of knowing the world, as a way of communicating and making evident certain processes, but also to connecting to broader interests. And it is here that certain figures such as Alexander von Humboldt, who has recently been sort of recapturing the imagination of spatial practices, brings in a lot of work to be thought about that has been instrumental in the way we think. Of course, we all know that Humboldt was interested in, as a sort of, was an enlightened traveler, a person of words, but also of drawings, of imagining the relationship between the natural and the cultural, between the political and the way they could produce new forms of understanding our knowledge of the world. In a way, we could say that Humboldt was also the first environmentalist. But also we're interested in the way that by venturing outside our traditional disciplines and practices, we can gain what I call an enlightened curiosity. An article a couple of years ago about Paul Romer, the Nobel-winning economist, visits Burning Man as a way to think that informal processes of organization could have lessons for economy, could produce lessons as well for the city. And in this act, we have kind of always venture into what happens at the edges of the discipline, not only in terms of the disciplines of design, but actually farther beyond into other disciplines and culture. In Alfonso Cuarón's fantastic movie Roma, there's a section in which they talk about Neza, Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl, which was a site of my doctoral dissertation and the place where we started researching about other issues outside the disciplines of architecture. In other words, what if half of our cities in Mexico, but in other parts of Latin America, were produced outside the protocols of architecture and planning? What could we learn by looking into these things? And by developing a curiosity about these phenomena, we could begin to address them and bring them into the practice. But at the same time, later on, we could be asked to do and build and transform and improve some of these neighborhoods, such as we were lucky to do with our mobility project in Ciudad Neza. In other words, what we're trying to say is that by developing, and this is for students, a lesson, when you start looking at certain things that interest you, there's kind of like a circle that comes back and becomes a way of engaging the city and the territory. Part of what characterizes our office, or at least one of the reasons we've been kind of recognized here in Mexico, is that we have a kind of an urban and a territorial narrative. We've not only been fascinated with what happens at a larger scale, but have developed our own techniques of analyzing, synthesizing, representing phenomena that deal sometimes with space, sometimes with programs, sometimes with politics, and brought it back to the realm of architecture. A few years ago, we were asked to develop, along with ACOM, the resilience strategy funded by Rockefeller Foundation for Mexico City. And this meant sort of zooming out to a scale in which we could look at issues that become the core constituent ingredients of an urban practice, whether it is landslides and floods vulnerability, to hazards, seismic risks, but also demographic and hydrological issues. And this has become a way that we have approached other large-scale projects, whether this project called Ciudad Mayor that we developed with Sasaki and Associates in León, Guanajuato, almost a 2 million square meter development that has been an ongoing process for more than 5 years, and in which these techniques that we gain from the edges of the discipline have become really the ways and the procedures for us to work. Or this project that we developed with Alberto Kalach, commissioned by Infonavit and by the state of Baja California, to develop a new community of housing in just 10 minutes north of Cabo San Lucas in the state of Baja. And based on the premise that by developing this combination of strong physical planning moves along with a different understanding of how social housing gets developed, we could bring in a new narrative about the relationship between economic and touristic processes with the processes of urban and territorial transformation. In the same fashion, we have addressed the questions of tourism, the questions of leisure, the questions of how do we imagine a 10,000 kilometer coastline of development, which is usually transformed in the most aggressive, unsustainable, and sort of colonializing ways. How could we develop new sensibilities? These are fantastic drawings by our collaborator, Janice Cruz, who heads our landscape department, and who, in the act of combining and approaching landscape architecture from the first moment in our planning projects, we can certainly produce a different kind of environment, a different kind of form of acting in the landscape. And sometimes in these processes, we have to kind of mediate between the realities of economic and urban development, whether it is a sort of doing large scale subdivisions, such as this one called Culcana in the edges of Cancun. But this has the kind of ability to sort of be negotiating the challenges of the practice, the way that the economics of development and the politics of development match the ideas of other benchmarking for sustainability and urban indicators is key to the way we practice. And in these processes, we have engaged in fantastic conversations. In discovering, as Saidee was saying, for us, architecture has become the platform to engage conversations with clients, with authorities, with colleagues and peers, with new experts and old friends. And we have been fortunate to be engaged in some of the most interesting and radical or ambitious projects in Mexico City nowadays, including some of the most of the sort of the largest intermodal hubs in Mexico City, places where over 100,000 people exchange modes of transportation between subway, buses, cycle, or regional transportation. One of these hubs is in Tacubaya, in the central core of Mexico City. And these are complex projects which include parking, the intermodal hub itself, shopping arcades, offices, and housing. And so we bring a kind of sensibility that mediates between the possibilities of an architecture that has urban sensibilities, but also the needs to address and to materialize and to be almost an advocate for the city and its citizens. And it is in these acts that we have kind of gained not only an expertise, but also have been asked to engage in future projects beyond Tacubaya. What started as one project in Tacubaya in one site becomes later a project that involves a different client, a new client called Tavistock, with 3 different sites and 6 different towers. So at this point, we're producing an ensemble of buildings around Tacubaya, which will be probably a radical transformation for this part of the city.
I believe that working in all different scales, architecture, urban, and mobility issues allow us to understand a little bit better the relation in between the spaces, in the relation between the private and the public, the open space and the closed space, the buildings and the urban scale. So I believe that working in these 3 different elements has constituted most of our work we have to do, whether it's working in architecture scale or in master planning.
And for us, it means sort of being, let's call it a double-sided advocate. On the one hand, vis-a-vis our clients, we defend the interests of the city and we defend the interests of citizens. How does a building come down to the ground? How do we activate the ground floor? How do we privilege the pedestrian? How do we constitute more reasonable typologies that address the new realities of demographics in Mexico? How do we create porosity? How do we engage in dissoluting the borders between the private and the public? And these are the challenges of large-scale buildings, sometimes financed by private equity funds on the other side of the ocean or in different latitudes. To act simultaneously as a lawyer, an urban planner, and as an architect has given us certain edge in engaging some larger scale projects, such as this one, which is another intermodal hub, this one in San Lázaro. So to actually make a shopping arcade, a transportation hub, a place where 50,000 people pass by, is really like an important challenge for us. And it is a kind of knowledge that we have extended to other forms of acting, such as the educational campus. We started developing with Sasaki and Associates the large master plan for the Universidad Panamericana campus in the periphery of Mexico City, which has then allowed us to venture now into 3 additional campuses, including this one for the Comunidad Educativa Tomás Moro, where very small, minor interventions on a campus started over 3 decades ago by Oscar Hagerman, one of the most sensible architects in Mexico, has meant that sometimes architecture is more about producing and making evident the hierarchies, sort of allocating the resources in a more sort of sustainable fashion. And sometimes the possibility of an architecture has to be one of humbleness and discreteness. And in a similar fashion, we're now working and building 2 social infrastructure facilities for the government of Mexico City called Pilares, which are hubs of education and trade knowledge. One of them in Iztapalapa and another one in the Benito Juarez borough of Mexico City.
But understanding the program and the budget are very important issues because we know that working in public buildings, the use and the budget are very, very important things that we need to consider.
And in this case, it's sort of matching this overlapping Venn diagram of where sort of the spatial generosity combined with easy to develop construction processes, but with a capacity to produce infrastructures that have a dignity associated with public practice is fundamental for us. The one in Benito Juarez, actually both of them are already in construction. This is a photograph of the foundation slab from a couple of days ago. And we have moved up to different scales from this idea of the educational campus and the infrastructures of wellness and social development. We're now developing the largest master plan for a hospital and health campus called Médica Sur in Mexico City. We're in a parcel where we can build 500,000 square meters. We're developing the spaces for new educational and new research and new health programs in a large district of in the southern part of Mexico City. This capacity, we just presented this project to the mayor of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum, and this means that, like I was saying, we kind of we're playing advocate for the developer and the client. We guarantee that our expectations about return on investment and program capacity are met, but we're also acting in defense of the cities and the citizens' interest. In this fashion, we've recently had a fantastic collaboration with Cummins and Cummins Company, which is one of the most important engine companies in out of Columbus, Indiana. And we have finished the master plan for their facility here in Mexico, in San Luis Potosí, finished their first building and are now just developing a second building. Part of Cummins, which was founded by Mr. Miller decades ago, and commissioned architects such as Kevin Rush and many, many others to develop their facilities, has a culture of design and a culture of understanding the processes of designing in a very interesting fashion. We've been fortunate to spend some time in Columbus, and we're happy to collaborate with them. We're now developing another project with them in Ciudad Juárez, expanding their facilities, and now talking about some projects on the other side of the border. But to think about the workspace as somewhere in between the factory and sort of a collaborative working space is fundamental for us. as Saidee was saying, a good chunk of our work is now public work. And what starts initially as a conversation, almost as an advisory for the state of Yucatan to develop the regional and urban strategy, has turned into a 3-year collaboration where we have helped them in understand what are the roles of architecture, infrastructure, and economic development in facilitating and establishing a strategy that's sustainable, inclusionary, that improves quality of life, and that's developed under cultural identity in match with development. And this means developing new tools and new ways of establishing high and communicating hierarchies, whether it's about scale of local, municipal, regional, and state development, whether it's understanding actions and how they fit, but also to develop easily communicable and graspable techniques to communicate the pertinence of an action, and never to lose sight of what's important for a public agency. To understand that sometimes the most important projects are the most difficult to implement, but at the same time that the politics require the low-hanging fruits to show and to communicate what a state is doing for its citizens. And we have just now, and last week it was inaugurated, we developed for the city of Mérida the new organization of the transportation system, which includes the creation of new city bikeways. We analyzed over 50 crossings in the city and developed new, safer modes of facilitating pedestrian movement. But we have developed the new bus system that will improve by 30% the quality of the trip and reduce the time people spend on public transportation, including the new app. We work with Cadena and Asociados, who's a partner of us in many projects, in addressing how should the image of a new bus should give pride and civic pride to who's riding them, and why one should be sort of happy about the public transportation system you have in a city. And part of this goes back to our understanding that research is a way of practicing. What initiates as a more non-solicited architecture becomes a way for us to engage in new projects. We started working with Audi a few years ago and worked for 4 years in understanding mobility in Mexico City, which has then become new avenues for new types of work.
During this time, we have been fortunate to be recipients of the Mexican National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, offered by the Secretary of Culture. This fellowship support with a small stipend, a design or research work to be developed over 3 years. In 2012, I was only the second woman to receive this grant in over 23 years, and 4 years later got the second one. Jose has also received the fellowship twice, once for a project of peripheral landscapes, another for his project on food, cooking, and the city. These projects and pursuits connect and inform curiosity with our professional concerns that allow us to think and investigate through our everyday practice. For us, these projects are an excuse to deepen our engagement in contemporary issues of the city, understand them better, and to incorporate the research and ideas into our practice. This first project I received a grant was called Norm and Exception, and it had to do with the way the architectural practice is limited, constructed, and regulated by norms and codes that are neither neutral nor objective. Beyond architectural principles and forms of operation, legal norms and its transgressions are central to the shape that architecture takes. From zoning to parking regulations, from standards and minimum dimensions to structural regulations, we seem to take for granted how dominant these forces are. As George Canguilhem had written in his book, The Norm and the Pathological, the exception is not the opposite of normal, because exceptions at one point become normal. This project, through the production of a dictionary, an atlas, and a manual, investigate the ways in which norms and their exceptions in Mexico City have shaped and built environment and how we can reclaim control in the production and transformation. The second project could be considered a continuation on the previous one. It's called The City and Its Forms, Urbanization, Lotification, and Edification. The project investigates and speculates on the different forms of city growth and transformation as a progress in which social, economic, and land ownership forces become the real drivers for city form. By looking at the process of urbanization, subdivisions, and buildings, and working in 9 different geographies, both in central zones and peripheries in Mexico City, I attempt to understand the different protocols and regimes that shape the growth of the city, similar to the norm and exception. By understanding the procedural aspects of these regimes, we are better suited to propose alternative models.
And in a way, all these projects of research have become an excuse to inform the work, to actually give us the tools to develop better housing. By understanding these dynamics currently going on, we could develop better housing. We got asked and hired by the Infonavit, the National Housing Trust Workers Fund, to develop a typology of rural housing in the state of Yucatan. In the state in Tetis, which then becomes a way to imagine forms of housing which are not colonializing, which are not away from the identities and the forms of living that these communities have. And this has been part of a way we have approached from these models of rural housing, such as the one of reconstruction housing we did after the earthquake of 2017 in the state of Oaxaca, but also which have moved to much larger scales and different process. But what connects these ideas is that if we understand the forms of housing, if we understand typology and morphology, we can produce better and more informed approaches to that are sort of enhanced performance for our clients, but also for the citizens. This was our first multifamily housing project in Mexico City, almost 800 units of housing, affordable housing, for a developer which had built most of his housing in the peripheries. And this was his first project, for which he won the National Housing Award. And each of these projects is sort of an incremental gain of the one that came before one. So as we begin gaining trust and confidence, we can now invest more in landscape. We can invest more in the quality of the urban space. And as we move along, we understand that the density or the scale of each of these projects is fundamental to the construction of a particular understanding of community. Most recently, we have been very lucky to work with our great friends and partners of Productora in 3 collaboration projects for a client called CCLA. And this is multifamily housing project, 2 of them in Guadalajara and 1 of them in Mexico City, and in which by understanding and by showing all the research that we have worked before, we actually cut corners and are allowed to gain the trust and confidence for people whose traditional language is just one of the Excel sheet, the return on investment. And here's where the capacity to understand typology and connect it to new demographies, we can understand what a studio, what an amenity, what an active ground floor mean for a building, what it means to have an activated courtyard, what it means to have different diversities of typologies in each building. This is the one in Bucareli. The previous ones were in Guadalajara. This is one in the historic center of Mexico City in Bucareli. Just 2 blocks from Reforma Avenue, and which all are sort of invested interest of materiality, tectonics, of connecting to the form of the city, is in addition to a very sort of tight and sort of order way of connecting the expectations of our clients. In a parallel fashion, as Saidee was saying earlier, sometimes your interests connect with your personal and familiar choices. Sometimes you get asked by Mexico's most important chef, Enrique Olvera, to give a lecture on food and the city to colleagues and peers, and which you develop a different audience, which becomes a research project on food, cooking, and the city, which is a way that food is also a sort of a system, not unlike architecture and urbanism, where we can learn about resources, where we can learn about transformation, where we can learn about representation and the way these spaces shape the city, where we can understand supply systems and the role they have on space, and why it is less expensive to bring a gallon of oil from Malaysia to the Pacific coast of Mexico that it is from Sinaloa to Mexico City. And to actually see that this has a sense of agency. These are some of the drawings also done by Janice Cruz in terms of the instruments we use to think about food. And later it became, as Saidee obtained her fellowship at the Rogers House in Wimbledon, in London, I was working on questions on food and managed to interview over 40 chefs, visit over 30 markets, and to see how London has been transformed, not by its architecture itself, but by the role and the transformation of the supply chains as they relate to food.
And at the same time, I was working in affordable housing, visiting a lot of different housings from the World War II social housing to the most modern and contemporary housing, and how to learn about how we create this housing and how can we learn about that so that we can replicate in some cases here in Mexico.
And those techniques of understanding what happens at the edges of the discipline and in other disciplines then become the way we take it back to an architectural competition, such as this remodeling of La Merced, where rather than just remodeling a market which had been destroyed by fire, we developed strategies, operations, and actions to transform a whole new neighborhood in the outskirts of Mexico City center. But most important is that it's not only about the spatial strategies, which we feel sort of confident and comfortable in developing, but actually sometimes more about listening to the people living there, to the people who understand this space, this community, and their needs more than others. We did not win that competition. We won third prize, but we're asked to, because of the technique, to refurbish the Mercado San Juan, which is the most important sort of a luxury item, or let's say popular market for high-end food. And sometimes to recognize that it is just a minor action of changing infrastructure, to listening to the tenants, and to facilitate better light, better infrastructure, and a new identity through the facade. It was crucial for us to develop a project. This one we did in collaboration with Julio Amezcua, who's part of the team and who's actually here in the Zoom conference, and with his former partner, Francisco Pardo. And in the same fashion, we have continued collaborating with chefs, with Jorge Vallejo and Alejandra Flores, with whom we're now working in their fourth project. We started first with Quintonil, which is one of the highest ranked restaurants in Mexico. But most important, we have also taken these lessons back to our office. A couple of years ago, we designed and built the kitchen space in our own office, because we felt that food is a space of collaboration. If architecture is a possibility to establish connection with peers, food is the best lubricant to do so. And we have done not only for the daily lunches that people are now using this space, but we used to do before COVID the monthly places where lunches where one person cooks and we share and we talk and we work on this space. And it is important for us to talk. It's not only a kind of sort of the bright and the shiny, but also about failures and how we fail as architects, as professionals, but also as human beings.
Yeah, to fail means next time you must do better. It shouldn't be an act of learning. We fail when we have unhappy clients, when we were not able to engage in the construction, when we were not committed to understand the program and the final user. We fail in thinking we are architects that only design rather than be a facilitator. We fail when we want to do the whole project rather than bring more expertise and ideas to the table, when we are not able to convince someone.
We have the idea that in a way failure happens in a sort of in the gap between expectations and realities, and architects tend to get extremely frustrated, partially because of our or their narcissistic impulse, that we tend to feel that there's always a gap between what we imagine and what gets built. And sometimes we fail to understand that we may be responsible for those gaps. This is one of our sort of a bittersweet projects, which is the Performing Arts Center in Guadalajara, where after actually being fired from the job in the second year, the client decided to finish the building halfway between our drawings and a new architect who did triage very much to our discontent. But sometimes in this act of recognizing that you let go, that you win some, you lose some, that sometimes it is best to get to a building that's successful with the public and that has its moments of clarity, even if we did not select those wooden panelings at the end. Than to actually have full control of it. And we are coming to terms with our own failures. And we feel this is very much about this moment in time where there's a kind of an awareness of moments of reckoning between the gaps of the personal and the professional, of people we idolize and people we admire, and the failings they have, both as human beings, but also as role models. And we have to be aware, and this I think is a very important task for the profession. And most important for us is that it is not about the buildings alone. A911 is not about what the build work is. And here's where we could engage in a kind of a radical discussion, not only about what Rafael Manuel called the solitude of buildings, the building that remains, but actually how the project of building an office is as important to the form of work, to the kind of community we create. And we've made an effort to be extremely aware of what building the office is as part of a project. And this goes on from the type of work we do to the type of publications we sort of engage in, to the way we communicate with clients, to the models we develop, to the diagrams, to the presentations, to the discourses, the stories we tell, the narratives we make. And this is clear for us. But maybe most important is the way that in this particular question, the notion of gender has become an unavoidable task and really something we need to address and that we have tried to.
Yeah, we live in a country where it is estimated that every year there are 600,000 cases of sexual abuse. For many women, it is not safe to navigate certain parts of the city or at certain times, whether in transportation or in public spaces, whether it is the income gap or the systemic and rooted forms of hard and light discrimination. It seems that being a woman in Mexico is sometimes an extreme sport. Last year, a group of 6 friends convened to march together as architects, and in only 5 days, we gathered more than 800 women architects and designers. We joined the massive demonstrations in March 8, taking the streets to demand respect, recognition, visibility, equality, inclusion, with the motto of Construyendo Equidad, building equity. This situation extends in some degree to the professional world of architecture, where a combination of historically man-led discipline combines with rooted toxic behavior has resulted in women and minorities systematically being marginalized within the office, in credits, in media, or in the shaping of practices and intellectual discourses. As a woman, but also as part of a couple working and living together, we understand the importance that both the small and the large decisions have in producing forms of gender equality. In 911, we are totally convinced and committed to promote the empowerment of women and understand the dynamics on when we need to be flexible and supportive. We have come to understand that designing our own way of practice as women should be one that allows us to be professionals, wives, mothers, daughters, or any other roles we strive to. Women comprise 50% of our team at 911. Of the 11 leadership positions, 7 of us are women, and 4 of us are working mothers. For us, inclusion, equality, and empowerment are not part of an abstract discourse. It is a reality we work on every day, both in the way we organize our office and our teams, but most important, the ways we address and produce our work, from housing to public spaces to mobility projects. We are impressed and proud of the ways women engage and commit to work in 911, bringing fresh energy and ideas and willing to take risks. Women are generally compelled to switch hour by hour within different domains and roles: home, work, children, caring parents, just to mention some. And most of the time, sacrificing our personal time. In 911, we work every day to create that balance that allows us, women, to be able to enjoy every part of our lives, searching different and new solutions.
In a way, it is important for us, and Suketo Mehta says, is never let anyone outside of the law, outside of the celebration, and outside of the voice of the participation. And it is important. This is our one of our leaders in urban design, Ana Marta Legorreta, presenting to one of the most important development groups, which, as you can see, is only comprised by men. I am sitting there in the edge. I'm actually took this picture, but it is important for us, as this previous photo of Saidee presenting to Kenneth Frampton when he visited the office. It is important to make sure that the voice of women is heard, it is recognized, is given credit. And sometimes when we fail, we need to reckon that. And we fail for sure as well. But it is important to feel that in this possibility of forms of inclusivity and gender equality, we recognize, and this is our partner, Andrea Gutierrez, who's actually in maternity leave. This is her first baby, is that it is in the quotidian way we produce an office, we communicate, we engage the work, we give voice, that it is where gender equality and other forms of equality, whether it is racial or other minorities, it is produced, and where actually the distortions are replicated. As part of Saidee's agenda of leadership, and along some other brilliant practitioners such as Frida Escobedo, Loreta Castro, Tatiana Bilbao, and Paloma Vera, Jimena de Gortari, Anaisha Ballesteros, Sol Camacho, and Rosana Montiel, and many, many others, in an act of protest towards the Academy of Architecture, not quite the AIA of Mexico, but sort of a cultural group that in its last immersion of new members, decided to give 75% of the new sort of inclusion of members to male practitioners, including at least 3 cases in which the male partner was recognized as a new member of the academy and the woman member was not recognized, in partnerships which are about equality. And Saidee and this group of women put together this act of protest, which has now resulted in the academy revising its governance and practices. These acts of gender equality require activism and require an everyday and require a form of understanding what has been traditionally a male-dominated and in many cases toxic ways of practicing. And this is very much related to forms of collaboration. For us to collaborate, to develop empathy towards other has been a way to become more sensible. And we have been fortunate to work and collaborate with many, many practices, locals and foreign, extremely talented and younger and older than us.
We have the Travel Fellowship at 911. We are convinced that travel and research projects are important to create new ideas that contribute to our everyday practice. Travel as a way to investigate, to create different experiences and expand our knowledge that later become part of our memory library. 911 offers 2 travel fellowships a year, open to all collaborators. The idea of this fellowship is that we can connect this research to things that are relevant to the projects we do in the office. The proposal must include a place and a specific interest, detailed schedules, and cost estimates. And in 2018, the winners traveled, one to Canada and the other one to China. And in 2019, one traveled to New York and the other one to Costa Rica.
It is for us crucial, and this is after returning from our 3 months in London. We said that in a way, kind of we need to spread the intellectual wealth in the office. And part of it is also inviting guest jurors. Saidee and I do not decide on the fellowship recipients, but we invite people, in this case, Emmanuel Ramirez from MMX, Frida Escobedo and Miquela Adrià, editor of Arquine and a former professor at Unm. The 2 winners from the first edition, Ana Marta Legorreta and Janice Cruz. And here's some of the work they did. Janice did these amazing drawings of sort of landscapes in China, and Ana Marta worked on neighborhood transformations in Seattle and Vancouver. This is Rosalba presenting the edition. There's 1AX, Santiago Castillo, Gaby Alarcón and Rosana Montiel, along with Ruda Esteves, who were the jurors in the second. So we kind of expose, and we want to put everyone in the office in a kind of a situation where they can not only get the best comments from the outside jurors, but also sort of construct an argument about knowledge, and a knowledge connected to the way we design. And this is fundamental for us. And lastly, but not least, and kind of just a few slides on the last project we want to present. The lecture was called Agreements and Disagreements. Saidee and I are not only partners at work, but are also partners in life. And we've been together over 30 years. And in a way, probably nothing distinguishes a partnership or a marriage more than agreements and disagreements. But this, in a way, is more about the way we deliberate in architecture. The architectural office for us is to making evident the possibilities of conflict, but the possibilities of difference, the possibilities of building consensus, but the possibilities of also communicating what are the pros and cons of each project. In this last project, we're showing it is a public project, which 6 months ago we presented to the mayor of Mexico City, a project that started over 13 years ago for a competition, which we did not win, but that has evolved into a project of reclaiming public space over a 14-lane urban highway in the eastern edge of Chapultepec Park. What is now a scar in the city in Reforma Avenue and Circuito Interior, the inner circuit, we're hoping to turn in the next few years into 6 hectares of new public space that will benefit everyone, not only in the surrounding neighborhoods, but everyone moving by bike, by walking, by visiting Chapultepec Park. For us, in this act of unsolicited architect, it's also the act of negotiating and sort of communicating what is a possibility and the agency of architecture and urban planning. In this act of reclaiming the public work, the public sphere, and the public discourse of architecture is where we find the power of 911 and every one of our collaborators. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Robert.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful lecture. Thank you, Saidee and Jose. I would love to now open it up for questions. And I will read questions from the chat, or actually I'll just call on your name and you can ask the question so I don't read. So we have one question from Christopher Callett.
Chris, so great to hear from you. Happy that you're here. Last time we were in New Mexico, Chris showed us his work and we were happy to walk downtown Albuquerque with him. So Chris, nice to reconnect. The Pilares program is a part of initiative of the new administration led by Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum. And part of the idea is not unlike the social infrastructures of the built in Brazil around the CESCs, the famous one built by Lina Bobardi, the CESC Pompeia, but which is if you have these facilities at a neighborhood level where people can have classes that deal with digital media, manufacturing, light manufacturing, certain trades, you are able to produce a sense of community that for certain children and for certain teenagers becomes fundamental aspect of the educational and social capital that gets built in a neighborhood. These two projects are part of a larger network in which many colleagues and friends from Alberto Calach to Productora, from Saidee Springall to many others, they are, each of the is producing one or two of these facilities. And we're really happy. They're very tight on budget. But we're really happy of the way they're coming together. And it's a great idea that's having a lot of impact for the neighborhoods where they're getting built.
Yeah, and we also believe that creating an architecture that could evolve in the time, that now there are, I don't know, rooms for teachings or it can evolve in something different because we know that the learning thing is changing every day. So it's creating like a very flexible building as well. And that was an important part of the project.
Can I follow up and ask if there was a community safety element associated with this program? The thought that because people are having conversations about defunding the police here in the States, and I kept thinking about the Pilares projects as a perfect example.
Well, you know, Chris, as an anecdote, which is obliquely answering your question, the one in Iztapalapa is getting built on a site of a former safe house used by drug traffickers and extortioners. So this was a site where some of the most terrible hijackings and acts of violence happened a few years back. So the city did eminent domain on this site. And initially the community wasn't sure of occupying this site. So it does not show in the plan. Actually, in one of the renders, we're producing sort of like an interior passageway. This is on a corner. So we're addressing the question of simultaneously reclaiming the possibility of a public sphere, but creating it under the guise of absolute safety, which is crucial in some of these neighborhoods. But we feel, and again, it has there's no sort of these are not police stations. These are not places where you have a security guard in the front. These are the places where safety has to be rebuilt, both through physical design, but most of all about sort of engagement with the community. It will not happen unless community is engaged.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? You can also raise your hand if you want with the icons, if you want to ask a question. Seeing so many people from so many other universities. I see Gabriel Diaz Montemayor, who's at University of Arkansas, and Irene Kyle, who's at Tulane University. Quite a following here.
Hi, Gabriel. Hi, Irene. Great partners and friends with Irene. It's been crazy to remember that it's 16 years ago that we taught together at Tulane. One of my first experiences teaching in the US, and with Gabriel, also kind of a partner in arms of, at his times at ASU, and UT later on. So happy to have them here and to share a few years down the road where we are.
Can I ask a question?
Please, Gabriel.
Yes.
Hey, good to see you, Saidee. Jose, thank you for the lecture. Fantastic.
Yeah, and related to the pedestrian and the bikers, I think in all our projects, whether it's a small scale or a large scale, we always think on the ground level. I mean, ground level that is, activated, that is porous, that is open for pedestrians, that we can create, like sidewalks, very generous, that we can create, like always trying to get the less for the car and the most for the pedestrians. I mean, we need to balance in between those two, but we always think on the ground level because the city is felt and it's lived and felt in the ground level. I mean, and as you were saying with the government issues, I think it's always like finding that the good balance between the expectations of the client and the issues with the government. As Jose was saying, they think that everything is very tall and that everything is very dense, but then for the client has to make sense in terms of the program and the square meters you can, and the financial program you can get from that. So it's always, like going back and forward to calibrate these projects that are over 2,050.
300,000 square meters almost. So it's 3 million square feet of development. That's something. And by the way, we insist on the question of time. The city, I always use the kind of the Baron Lafitte quote when he asked, sure, making wine is quite easy. It's only the first 200 years that it is difficult. A little bit of that goes with city planning. Any kind of city that we tend to believe can become instant or too fast usually is a failure. So we need to calibrate what Alejandro Aravena has this term called the patient capital. We need to kind of restrain our developers and make it evident that on the longer run, patience is as fundamental as good design.
Great. Jose, I have and Saidee, I have a question. I know, you are a long-term partnership. You've sort of formed your practice together with a lot of your own formation sort of intersecting and beginning together. And you are, you definitely have a very specific way of approaching projects, but you also work a lot with collaborators. And I'm wondering, at what point have collaborators that you've worked with challenged your own way of thinking? And where have you been the most moldable, or where have you completely sort of reframed everything because of that experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. And there's a piece by Arthur Brooks on the Atlantic about as opposed to passionate love. And he talks about happiness. He writes about happiness. And he writes that the forms of happiness that we associate with friendships are even more sort of longer lasting than the ones we associate with the, let's say, the highly combustion of romantic love. Mm-hmm. I mentioned this because it also has that capacity for collaborations. And we tend to think that collaboration should only be a sort of, let's say, the sparks and explosions that comes, the drama that comes out of big egos and talent. And not only do we have many, Julio, who's here, started as a sort of a colleague, who then became a friend, who then became a collaborator while he was at another office, who's now a fundamental part of 911. It has to do because we contribute to expand the conversation, because we gain pleasure from that. our most recent conversations with Productora, which started 15 years ago and are now ongoing and full speed ahead, have to do with the fact that Saidee and Carlos Bedoya connect in a very special way, and Abel Perles and myself, or Wone and myself, connect in some other ways. And Victor and Saidee can suddenly engage in doing a model, which is absolutely pleasurable for everyone. And if it stops being fun, or if it stops producing pleasure, if it stops sort of kind of improving the production of sort of the chemistry of happiness, I think it is a problem if it's not doing that.
Yeah, I think we look outside what we don't have inside, and I think that always complement and create like better conversations. I mean, I will never imagine that more heads will do worse. I believe that they really create like a new synergy and new and renovated energy by trying to gather different expertises. And I will say that one of the projects that in which we've been collaborated are the ones that we really enjoyed the most. If we had very clear which are, you know, like the expectations of the both offices or the different collaborations. And I will say that transparency and clearness in the
communication, joint partnership.
Yeah, if we understand very well where we are competing, and because it's not a competition, we never feel like a competition. Is always to bring better ideas, and it motivates us a lot. And sometimes we decide to go to alone, and sometimes we really do it because we like it, and sometimes we do it because we need it. So we work in those three different levels of collaboration.
And you're right, Robert. I mean, there's some people ask us with a kind of an odd face, like, how can you have simultaneously, or let's say, how have you collaborated with Alberto Kalach, with Enrique Norten, and with Isaac Broyd, who are 10, 15, 20 years our senior, or 15 years our senior in some cases, and simultaneously collaborating with Rosana Montiel, Frida Escobedo, and Productora, who are 10 years or 15 years our junior. And we, you know, in one lecture, I like to talk about Danny Meyer, the chef and restaurateur, owner of some of the best restaurants in New York City, and now kind of a partner in Shake Shack and whatever. But he talks about hospitality. And we feel that architecture discipline has a lot to learn from the act of hospitality, and to be hospitable, and to kind of to care for others. And partnerships and collaborations are also about care. And we have managed to not mention the C19 word so far, but I think that if there's kind of like a lesson is that it makes no sense to become ambulance chasers to sort of like a frivolous ambulance chasers to the big issues of our time. Mm-hmm. But it makes sense to learn about empathy, to learn about care, to learn about solidarity, to learn about there are more important things in life than appearing in the cover of a shiny magazine. And for us, that's really part of what being an architect and producing architecture means.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. A quick follow-up to something you said during the lecture. The fellowship, is that open only to employees of A911, or so it's sort of a program?
Yeah, so far it is only. We've kind of venture at some point to say, should we open it further? I mean, we kind of got the 2020 kind of interrupted the third emission, but hopefully we'll do a late 2021, but if not 2022, and we'll definitely think of opening it up. I mean, I have to say, I mean, the other thing is that Saidee and I have been like more than lucky in almost any respect. we've had friends and colleagues having a much tougher time during this past 10 months. And I know it sounds kind of like sort of strange to say, like we need to engage in a more sharing way about knowledge, resources, opportunities, and we feel very strongly about it. And let's say we're 51 and 52. We have, like, let's say, half of our professional lives ahead of us, and we're finding the ways to make this more even more relevant vis-a-vis what happens inside our community and what happens outside our community.
Wonderful. I think we have one more question that we can ask. I think we're nearly out of time, but if someone has a question, any more questions? I have one last question, if I can ask it, and it's the women in architecture in Mexico, which is a big question. I'm from La Frontera. I know Mexican culture is in my blood, and I know the very toxic world of machismoism. And I'm just, when you ask about women in architecture in Mexico City, you just think, how does that happen in that culture, especially? It's been exciting to see recently, not so recently, it's been for a while now, the emergence of Tatiana Bilbao and her work and her international acclaim that she's received, and Frida Escobedo. And so we're starting to see, and then the two of you, where do you see this going? How do we continue to push that in Mexico, Saidee?
I will say that some of us are very fortunate to be where we are now, and that we have created like this opportunity to be next to a community or friends or partners, like Jose, that has been very, very close to this, and that has been like a part of this, I would say, of this way of being a little bit more public, and we have some exits in success in what we do. But we also recognize that being like in a position of privilege, we have a lot to do, not only with the woman we are working with, but also like in a more extensive thing. So I think that first we have to look as woman in my position, what am I doing to change this? And which platforms I'm doing or creating for empower more women. So I think it's like working, because there's like a very different degrees of things about the woman inequity. Has to do with the violence, has to do with inequity at work, and so many other things at home as well. So I think that for us it's very important to work in this level that we can really start to creating this change. But also there's a possibility, by working hard and sometimes have like these big challenges that sometimes we have to be, like in a room with, I don't know, only men trying to make understand and trying to make us being listened. It's not an easy job, but definitely it's something we have to work on. But also, I would say to bring men to this. It's not only a job that as women we have to do. We need also to work with men that believes in this change and that can produce different environments for women to be able to. So it's like working, like in very different levels. And of course, there's always like the capacity to be able to, as Tatiana and Frida, I can say that there are a lot of Mexican architects, women Mexican architects that are very successful international. But that doesn't mean that we live in a society that is a that creates gender equity. So we have a long way to go and a lot of things to do.
Yes.
So at least we can do it inside the office with 60 families. We are so, and I think that's something that we can start like bringing down so that this 60 becomes like 120 with the partners, friends, and families. So I think this is a way to go, but also. You know, like claiming and shouting and saying this is not good. So we have to be sure that we claim that the correct things, that we are activists in this and make very transparent what's going on, and definitely working like in a non toxic environment. And that's something we can do from the inside.
Great, thank you. Great answer. Thank you so much. So I think we're going to end. We're so honored to have you to join us this year in this wonderful position. Both Saidee and Jose are also working with our graduate students. They're teaching one of our design studios this semester, so we're very lucky that they're there. And we also would love it if some of our students could come and intern in your office. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity to experience Mexico City.
They're welcome. They're welcome. So let's talk about that for sure.
We'll plan on something. But thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us. Wonderful to see so many people from all over. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye.